Richard, my brother-in-law, very smart man, been a Christian for 114 years. Thank you for helping me this morning.
You bet.
We're talking about some of the poetic nature passages from the book of Isaiah, of which there's quite a few. As I was listening to it, it kept coming. So he likes to lapse into this. And I think, I know you did a word study and you found probably a dozen passages, or maybe a little fewer than that, where we're looking at water imagery, we're looking at desert imagery. And so that's what we're gonna talk about today.
There's something that living that has usually in our limited lifespans a little bit more longevity than we do. So I think it harkens back to something that we long for. I mean, we're in this fallen world and we're dying at early ages, and trees seem to have a bit more permanence to them. So I think, that's an aspect of it. And there's just something peaceful about it. You set aside, all the biblical references to trees and water and whatnot, even in other cultures. Right now there's a big thing in Japan about, forest bathing. So they go out to the forest and meditate and, rejuvenate themselves. And there is something very refreshing about being in a forest.
Hmm. Yeah, it's true. And maybe since we're city dwellers, we don't get it as much. My son Nick loves trees, and he was telling me that there was a tree in Nevada, somewhere in one of those mountain ridges in Nevada, that was, I think he said it was close to 5,000 years old. It was like the oldest tree in North America.
Right.
Some guy who worked for the Forest Service um, uh, inadvertently cut it down.
I think I remember hearing about that.
He was out there doing a study and he literally cut the oldest tree down, and so now there's a stump of the oldest tree. And it's kind of sad. It's interesting to think that every human, at least if they've been around trees, I would think that most humans have not been forced to live in treeless areas their entire lives. Even desert dwellers eventually get up to the highlands with the trees or whatever.
Right.
Every human has experienced what you and I are talking about, with that scent, that certain scent that comes from being in trees, and that certain relief that we feel. It's the psalmist saying, "The heavens declare the glory of God,"
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we can
Exactly.
feel it's not just a theology; it's a something we experience. So, what's with Isaiah? Why does he keep lapsing into tree language? What's
It's not just Isaiah, it's, rivers and water and trees. They pop up all over the Bible. So
Isaiah seemed to be a nature lover, and yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Like, yeah, the first psalm you just quoted. Jesus, Paul talks about the people of God as a tree.
right.
The some of the branches lopped off, and then some wild branches grafted in. Uh,
Pruning.
yeah, yeah. I wonder if Isaiah just was a nature lover. He would look at animals and think, oh, it's going to be hard for you when the Assyrians show up, uh,
Yeah.
or it's going to be great for you because you can roam the cities freely because there won't be any humans here. You can just kind of enjoy
Right.
hanging out
And
in the rubble.
and I think also, I mean, the reason nature crops up so much is because they didn't have the cities where you're isolated from nature, and you can live in New York and you maybe never interact with a tree in your whole life if you live in one little bitty small little place and never venture out of that. But and you go back 2,000 years, even in the city of Jerusalem, people probably got outside the walls and they're going to see and experience nature. I mean, they interact with nature to a much greater degree, at least that's my perception, than what we do
Mhm.
now.
Yeah,
Now we just walk out of our house, get in our car, drive to somewhere on asphalt and get out of that and walk on asphalt and go into an office. So we don't interact with nature that much, but their whole life revolved
yeah.
around interactions with nature.
Maybe once or twice a year, we'll take a little journey up into the trees. Oh, let's
Right.
watch the trees change. All right. Well, let's talk big picture. Isaiah. It seems like a lot of his tree imagery is tied to this theme of people being exiled, and
Right.
um, and
And restored.
and yeah, exiled and then restored. Exodus, if that's if we can make that into a verb or whatever, that would be. Uh, but a lot of these, he keeps talking about this highway coming back, and then in the midst of the highway language, 7 times in Isaiah, we've hit it the last couple of weeks. Um, he's also talking about water in the desert, trees. Picture people hiking from Babylon back to a green area.
Hmm.
How are we going to get through the desert? Well, don't worry, because God makes streams in the desert. So you will have places to drink. You will have trees. And by the way, you're like a tree. You're like a tree, and the work I'm doing with you is like a bunch of different kinds of trees. So,
Right. Yeah. It names several of them, one of the verses.
mhm.
Yeah. So, it's interesting because he has this longing that is expressed in the scripture about the desert being made, new. There's springs in the middle of the plains. He's going to plant cedars and acacias and myrtles and olive trees in the wilderness. It goes on to name junipers and elves and other things. Um, he's going to make the desert blossom. So clearly, part of the exile was going into a place where you didn't have, all the, I guess, I don't want to say prosperity, but you didn't have the benefits of being in a place that was lush and productive, that produced much out of the land. So,
Mhm.
they're just, dying of thirst, or that feels like it, and
Mhm.
says, well, you know, I'm going to make the desert new.
Mhm.
There's springs of living water.
It's interesting that both of Israel's enemies, Egypt and Babylon, Assyria, are areas that are, except for the swath of land right next to the rivers, the Nile River, the Tigris Euphrates rivers.
Hmm.
There's nothing. And then you have this little in between land that's on this fertile ridge with a bunch of trees, and that's their homeland.
I know,
So that,
sort of the focus is in Isaiah 35 or in the 40s, but what was very interesting I found was in Isaiah 48:18. It says, "If only you had paid attention to my commands, then your peace would have been like a river, and your righteousness like the waves of the sea." So, he's hearkening back. If you'd only followed what I said, none of this nonsense would have happened. You wouldn't have been exiled. You wouldn't have been dragged off into the desert, and your peace would have been like a river. So,
Red Sea, oh,